Today's reading is from Matthew chapter 22, verses 34 through 46. Laying out the scene for you from this chapter, Jesus is in the house of God. The house of God has turned to a place filled with Pharisees and books of the law. It's his second day in the temple, and it's been a long day. He's been questioned twice. The first time by the Pharisees, that came from last week's lectionary reading. It's where they ask Jesus about the face of Caesar on the coin, and Jesus tells them to give unto the emperor what is the emperor's, and give unto God what is God's. He amazed the Pharisees. The second question was posed to him by the Sadducees. These are a group of Judeans who don't believe in the resurrection. And what they did was they asked Jesus a question about marriage in the afterlife, designed solely to stump him. Jesus' response to him was one that deftly silenced them. So now the Pharisees are up again. Now the text doesn't provide us much insight to the Pharisees. I'm going to talk about the lawyer that asked Jesus the question, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment?" Let's imagine that this lawyer grew up among the Pharisees. He's not what we normally think of what a lawyer is. In fact, the Greek word nomikos literally means expert in the law, so he's really a scribe. He grew up in a Pharisaic school that taught about law and the traditions of the Pharisees. He's always done well. He's been the best in his class. He always comes up with the right answer first. He's a bright young man. I have to ask, why would he choose a question if he was trying to stump Jesus, such as, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment?" I've read the commentaries on Matthew. Our writers believe that Matthew meant to portray the Pharisees as stubborn, pig-headed people who had nothing more than the law in their lives. And they're probably right. But when I read that the Pharisees in the earlier passage were amazed, they were amazed now. They weren't angered. They weren't challenged. They were amazed. I have to wonder if something else is taking place here. When we say the scribe asked Jesus a question to test him, saying, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment?" What is he testing Jesus for? Is he trying to trick him? Or is he testing for something deeper from this upstart prophet from Galilee? Now, maybe this lawyer has been going around to other wise men, and he asked another one, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment?" And that wise man told him, "Son, the greatest commandment is to tithe 10% to the temple." And another time he went to another great master who's told him, "Son, the greatest commandment is to love the sinner but hate the sin." Now this lawyer has come across somebody that's already amazed the Pharisees and silenced the Sadducees. How hard is it to believe that this question that he asked, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment?" was not a test to entrap Jesus, but one in which to find out if this is truly the one that they've been looking for? The answers that Jesus has given him out of the texts are stuff the lawyer already knows. He's already an expert in these laws. "You shall love the Lord with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul." Comes right out of Deuteronomy. That's the first commandment. It's the Decalogue. And "you shall love your neighbor as yourself" is from Leviticus. The lawyer already knows these laws. What really turns his world upside down, what really changes everything, is what Jesus says next. On these two commandments hang all the laws and all the prophets. He's telling us everything depends on love. The moment the lawyer hears this, he knows that it's true. Deep down in his heart, he knows it's true. So when Jesus goes on to challenge the Pharisees on, what do you think of the Messiah? Whose son is he? Is the lawyer still engaged? Is he paying any attention at all? Or has his world, having been turned upside down, is he completely consumed with this new knowledge? Does he go home from there, brooding and silent and also amazed with this change in his life? Does he go to Passover dinner with his fellow Pharisees 2 nights from then? And while they're sitting down, all of them, all their lives are changed in one way or another after encountering Jesus. So dinner is kind of quiet. Does he stand up in the middle of dinner and say, how am I supposed to love my neighbor as myself? Do they glare at him until he sits back down? And the next morning, as the news of Jesus' arrest gets to this man, or as he hears the sounds on the street as Jesus is making himself up to that hill, does he walk out of his house? Does he follow the crowd? Does he sit and watch as Jesus suffers, humiliated on the cross, dying? The greatest love of all. What could have happened to this lawyer when news of Jesus' resurrection came back to him? Did he realize that the new covenant, he had a new covenant in his life? For those early Christians, that double commandment of love meant persecution and it meant death. For Christians today, we don't face daily extinction. We don't have that threat hanging over us as we move on through our lives. The meaning of to love God with all our heart and all our soul and all our mind, and to love our neighbors ourselves, isn't quite taken the same way. What are we to make of that? How are we to take God's sacrifice and redemption in light of that commandment? Take comfort. Salvation is based on God's grace. We don't have any choice on whether that happens to us or not. This is not a means to earn grace. This is a result of the grace that God has given us. We are compelled to love our neighbor as ourselves, and we are compelled to love the Lord our God with all our heart and all our soul and all our mind. It's a joy knowing that, and it's a joy being able to do that. So how do we do that in today's world? Do we designate money in our collection plates to go to feed the homeless on our city streets? Do we click online polls? Do we send our representatives emails and letters saying, I'm a Lutheran or I'm a Christian and I believe that you should vote this way? Do we meet with our church council and our pastor to discuss how to welcome minorities into our congregation? Those are all wonderful things to do, and they're all based on love. I can't help wondering, though. I've read a recent report that young people are leaving the churches. They're not coming to worship in our churches. Our attendance is wavering. It's at all-time lows, not just in my own Lutheran churches, but in churches in all levels of faith. All different denominations are suffering. How do we, as Christians, speak a message of love in today's world? Instead of putting money in the plates to go designate to feed our homeless, or in addition to putting that money in the plates, maybe we can do like Pastor Megan Rohr did when she encountered a homeless person on the street who was without shoes on their feet, and give them her shoes. Maybe we can follow that as what has happened, kicking off a shoe drive. Now the homeless of San Francisco have shoes on their feet. Maybe instead of trying to discuss how best to welcome minorities in our churches, we can actually take anti-racism training If you don't know what anti-racism is, look it up. Do a Google search. We can find out, rather than how to welcome people in our churches, we can find out what's making them feel unwelcome. All these things we can do. Jesus paid the ultimate sacrifice before the resurrection. God sent His Son to die for us. The ultimate love. And before we can fill our worship houses, before we can fill that house of God with the works and the people, we have to fill it with love. Everything depends on love. Amen.